Welcome to the 91 Untold Change Project. I'm Neil Almond. Thank you for joining us. In today's episode, we're talking to Sarah Smith. Now, the reason we asked Sarah to be part of the Change Project, in addition to her being an absolutely incredible human being and somebody we love here very, very much, is she has this really special power to be able to take research and empirical information and blend it with practice and how it can be applied in the real world in a way that people can produce change. Her personal passion is around positive psychology, and she's an absolute genius in that area, which is one of the reasons why she's also the leader of the 91 Untold Positive Psychology program, which you're very welcome to join us for if you'd like at any point. She's an incredible person. She's a highly experienced coach and change agent, and an inspirational human being. Anyway, enjoy the show. I really hope you do. I shall see you after the introduction. Welcome to the 91 Untold Change Project.
The whole universe is in a state of entropy.
If you can unlock that higher motivation, they'll be with you.
How do you create an environment where people can find meaning at work?
That can create the needed culture change.
How does radical change happen?
You know it's a good business.
In terms of our evolution, we were not required to have a conscious understanding of complex systems.
What creates great innovation in the social arena?
It starts with you taking action.
Have some real sense of control over our lives.
Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. I like that description. I might put that on my professional bio.
So maybe you can go into a little bit more depth around that. What is it you actually do? What are the sort of projects you get engaged in?
I ask myself that question every day. What is it I actually do? It's interesting because I guess in some senses, my work, the work that I'm involved in, kind of has different elements or kind of strands to it. So a large chunk of my work is working directly with clients, so through coaching conversations, coaching relationships, those sorts of things. And then also working directly with clients, but through group facilitation, whether that's group coaching or working on leadership programs, those sorts of things. Also going into organisations and looking at supporting them at a kind of cultural level. What can we do in terms of changing the culture within the organisation, so some of that more kind of organisational development consultancy work. But then there's another kind of chunk to my work, which is around getting engaged in research and in looking at what is it that some of the insights that are emerging in some of the kind of fields such as positive psychology, organisational psychology, some of those kind of areas which I think are really growing at the moment. What insights do they bring that actually support us in our practice? So I'm a real advocate for that, forming a bridge, I guess, between research and practice and how the two inform each other. And I think that's really important. And that kind of, so from one day I may be doing a lot more of the kind of research work, and then another day I might be out fully working with clients and kind of running coaching sessions. So
I think it's that blending of the two that makes you quite such a great person to speak to here, and why I enjoy working with you quite so much, because it is that taking research and you informed by practice rather than just in the abstract and testing it out and that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Again, praise. If I can take you back to the sort of organisational work that you're doing, and I'm sure research will be in there as well, but are there trends that you're seeing in organisations? One of the things that we are interested in is almost putting a futurology hat on. What are those trends you're seeing in organisations at the moment?
There's a lot of stuff going on at the moment, and I was having a conversation with somebody about this the other day. Actually, I think it's a really exciting time in terms of the sort of work that we do as well, because I think there's a real appetite and recognition within organisations that doing things differently and looking at what insights from areas like positive psychology, for example, kind of what is some of the stuff that research is revealing that enables and supports them to deal with the challenges that organisations face at the moment, the increasing amount of uncertainty that organisations are operating in, increasing globalisation, kind of changing workforce expectations, a need to collaborate, a need to do things very differently, and a real openness and appetite for what are ways in which we can do this, which I think is really exciting. So I think I noticed that even with clients that perhaps have a long kind of history in doing things a certain way, that even in those sorts of organisations, there's actually an increasing openness to being a bit more experimental and having a go at trying things, which I'm really encouraged by. I think that kind of a shift away from looking for change technologies that are, if we follow this 8-step plan, will give us the results that we want, and a recognition that actually it's much messier than that, and we need to be quite experimental, and we need to draw on a range of different ways of thinking. We need to kind of see what happens and emerges as we try things, and what supports us in doing that is having kind of skilled practitioners and an openness to what starts to emerge, so that we can react and respond and kind of shape the organisation in the way we want to going forward. So,
okay, and if you were a leader inside one of those organisations that hasn't naturally adopted that new perception, how would you go around bringing that into an organisation? What are almost the steps that you've noticed can be taken? What's the difference between those people who seem to be adapting and those that don't? I think
it's about courage.
Okay.
I think it's about kind of getting more comfortable with the feeling of vulnerability that I think is perhaps, it takes increasing courage as you move up into more and more senior leadership roles within organisations, to kind of lean into and take, that it can feel very uncomfortable letting go of stuff that perhaps has been the more traditional way of doing things, and being open to trying something a bit different. I think it can feel a very vulnerable position for leaders to kind of say, actually, I don't know.
Yeah.
And maybe there isn't a definite answer, and kind of putting that out there almost into the organisation and kind of co-creating sort of answers to what the organisation needs to be going into the future with people in the business is quite a scary place to step into, actually. It's and I think the need for kind of looking at how, as leaders, you kind of step into, I guess, tapping into that courage that enables you to do that. It's really important. So I guess, and that's some of the work that I'm particularly doing in coaching work often. Yeah.
So how do you actually do that? Because there's that old adage, isn't there? Nobody ever got sacked for bringing McKinsey or one of those big consultancy firms in. And I'm hearing the opposite here is, no, it's not about that thinking. No offence to McKinsey, but it's about the not knowingness. It's about, I don't know what the answer is here. Let's experiment. There's both an ego piece there and potentially in a lot of organisations a fear piece. So how do you get beyond that in order to find this new way of thinking? Yeah.
Not in one straightforward, easy path. No doubt you would expect me to say in all sorts of ways. I know. If
just
only.
Give me this solution.
Yes, you just need an extra coffee each morning, and then it's fine. You can do it. It's
available on our website now.
Quite. So, to me, one of the things that is really important this is about are the way in which we operate at an emotional level and how we deal with the emotional stuff that kind of kicks in, and the awareness of how that might be influencing our decision making, the way in which we operate and engage with other people, and having strategies and approaches and ways in which you can kind of manage that. So I think we live in a culture and a society which for a long time has advocated kind of, push that emotional stuff down, kind of leave it at the door when you walk into work. And that what that ultimately leads to is that it's popping up, it's accumulating, like the like the metaphor of holding a beach ball kind of underneath the surface of the water, is that actually it takes a lot of energy and we kind of think we've got it out of the way, but actually it pops up elsewhere. That if we notice and acknowledge our emotions, and I think those kick in a big way for a lot of people when we find ourselves in situations with increasing uncertainty. We can feel out of control.
Yeah.
And we almost... I really like this phrase, lean into the emotion, is that we don't, it's not about, kind of, oh, well, there it comes, and we sort of let it all out, if you like. It's that we just kind of lean into it and allow that emotional experience to be out there and to be okay with that. So this idea of accepting it rather than thinking that's not good or I need to kind of, buckle that down and shut it away. Actually, it can inform our decision making. So that kind of increasing insight into a richer awareness of our emotional experience in a kind of, with, kind of richer, more nuanced vocabulary around emotions, an awareness of what's going on at a physical level as well for us. Not always so much kind of up in what am I thinking about this, and kind of always bringing a kind of very head logical rational analysis to everything. It's not that that's not important, but it's about how do you kind of get a richer sense of all of that and bring it into the way in which you make decisions and engage in your kind of role as a leader.
That's really interesting. I like that metaphor of leaning in as well, because you kind of think, well, that's a negative emotion, or that's something that's painful. Why would I lean? But there is something magical that happens when you do.
It really is. Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
And sort of taking that a little bit further, that leaning in and being able to do that, have you got any thoughts about how the organisation has to be structured, or what needs to be present in the organisation to allow people to have the courage to be vulnerable in that way, and to let go of the ego, or let go of the position, or whatever it is they need to do in order to get to the other side, be experimental?
Yeah, I think so as well as accepting your own experience and kind of leaning into that more, that there's also therefore kind of accepting that in others as well. And again, I kind of want to, because I can almost hear, I know what some of the kind of resistance sometimes to this is, which is this idea that, does that mean, everything kind of ripples out and anything goes, and, people can, burst out and say things that actually hurt others. And absolutely, this is not what that is about at all. That is not what I'm describing. This is not about saying I don't also take responsibility for the way in which I behave around others. It's that I lean into that emotional experience and I allow it to be part of how I engage with others, but not in a way that is about damaging others. And so having a conversation about those things in teams starts to kind of make that sort of difference. So different level of conversation, I think, to the sort that happens on a day-to-day basis more typically.
I'm kind of hearing in that there used to be this thing in businesses about soft skills.
Yeah.
This idea that there are all these nice fluffy things that you could be doing, like being nice to people and communicating effectively and being vulnerable. And even the word soft kind of minimizes that as something that is a nice to have. What I'm hearing in what you're saying here is that's absolutely critical, that it's not this nice have thing, but that ability to have emotional intelligence and be in tune with your emotions and being able to host that for other people seems an essential part of leadership, from what I'm hearing in what you're saying.
I think it's a fundamentally important part of leadership, absolutely. And the research looking at the impact of emotional intelligence, for example, on people's success as leaders is really compelling. So it's often it's the qualitative difference that makes all the difference. And I'm a real advocate of leaders working on themselves in order to facilitate the best leadership. And I think that ripples all the way down organisations. So I also notice and see how patterns within an individual leader then ripple out and often show up or are manifested at a kind of team level and then at an organisational level. So I think these things are interconnected and interrelated. It's really important.
Yeah, I agree. And we were talking earlier before we started recording about executive coaching. Both you and I have executive coaching clients. And just in hearing what you're saying, it feels to me, and this isn't a plug for you and I as coaches, but it does feel to me, a lot of leaders have an executive coach. Choosing an executive coach that's okay with those emotions and is willing to lead those out of you seems to be important.
And go there. And I think, yes, it's... and I think that's one of the, not wanting to kind of go off maybe too much at a tangent, but I think it's one of the things that I would have some views and opinions on about coaching and a sort of sense of where actually a kind of model of coaching which is only about asking questions which are around facilitating somebody to come up with their own solutions to their own kind of challenges and situations that they're bringing. And I think there's enormous value in all of those sorts of conversations. I'm not remotely for 1 minute saying that I don't think that's a really important thing to be doing. And I think when people start out in coaching, actually that's a really important skill to get good at, because it's the bit that we're often not good at on a day-to-day basis, is kind of taking our own stuff kind of out of a conversation and truly only kind of listening and questioning to explore and guide. But actually, I think to do the deeper change work that's needed for a lot of people to step up and kind of really start to lean into their full potential, actually there need to be some additional skills that are brought in and a different way of working with clients and taking the responsibility actually as the coach to kind of really invest in and sponsor your clients' success and performance, and help them go there and do the work that's needed to kind of step up their game. I always say, who out of us is actually really operating at our full potential?
Well, I think that's...
and that's the stuff that, if we can tap into that and kind of really help people get all those barriers and blocks and things that get in the way of really living up to their potential, that pays enormous dividends for them. And I think that's the point around organisational change. It doesn't just also pay dividends for them. For an individual as a leader, it actually pays dividends for their team. It shows up in improved performance across organisations. It matters. Yes.
And I think that there's something really important in there's lots of important stuff you just said, but what I'm hearing in that bit about who amongst us is absolutely on the top of the A game. There's a humility that comes from, again, leaning into that and going, well, as a coach, I'm not there, so I can coach you on that. As a leader, I'm not there. So, but there's an excitement that comes for that growth. It gives that potential for growth, whereas if you're holding it at an ego level saying, I'm chief exec and therefore I must be there, there's no room for growth, and there's that tightness. That's the beach ball I heard you talking about earlier.
And what message does that say to kind of others around you? Everything about that message says that I'm the leader, I should have the answers, therefore you should all look to me, therefore you don't need to come up with answers, and that actually it's not okay to have kind of to not be there, to not be perfect, and to not have I often kind of go into organisations and say actually I think as senior leaders you have a responsibility to be vulnerable with your people that you work with. Yes. I think it's leaders cast a bigger shadow, and everything a leader does is observed and scrutinised by others, whether that's consciously or unconsciously. Others are mapping you and are looking to you and picking up on and really emulating. And therefore there is a whole kind of ripple effect to even those small moments, and all of those moments, they do really matter.
Yes. Okay, that's one of the reasons that a lot of the work that we're doing now is around change hacks and modelling out from a leader. It's like, how do you do these things? As well as what I'm hearing and what you're saying around the exec coaching, in challenging them on getting closer to that A game and being vulnerable and whatever.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so let's imagine somebody's is an entrepreneur starting up a new organisation that has hope to move forward, or they're just coming in as a new leader into an existing team. What can they do? What can they put in place that that helps some of the stuff we've been talking about emerge?
Okay. So I think one of the first things to look at is how do we work together, as much as it's tempting to jump straight into all the what do we want to be working on. So I think kind of process is really important. So looking at how do we almost contract, that sounds a bit formal. I'm not a big fan of that kind of term, but in a sense that is what I'm talking about. How do we as a team want to contract to work with each other? How can I as a leader support the team in order to be able to help them kind of really add value and kind of flourish and grow, and how can they all help each other, kind of making a real kind of commitment to a way of working, as well as, okay, these are the things that we need to be focusing on, these are our kind of objectives, these are our particular goals, so rather than only focusing on those things,
yes,
also absolutely investing time in thinking about how do we want to be working together, and that's not just a job that's done up front, that's something that's constantly, that's embedded into meetings, conversations, ways of working. How is this working? What do we want to do more of? What do we want to do less of? Feedback. I think feedback is so, I've never been into an organisation and when I ask people about the amount of feedback they get, I've never been in and had people say, "Oh my God, I get far too much feedback. I don't know what to do with all the feedback. Oh my God, it's like so much feedback. I don't know how to do." Invariably, you get people saying, well, I kind of, no news is good news sort of approach that, I kind of assume that I'll get feedback if things aren't working.
Yeah.
And I think when you're starting up in particular, and when you come in, if you've got a new team or you're starting a new business, this is a great opportunity to look at how can I establish and lay some of these things in place right from the beginning.
Yeah.
So good quality open conversations, a real kind of, appetite and desire to seek feedback from others. And to be giving good quality feedback to others. So a real honesty to conversations. And
do you have any top tips about how to either set up a culture for feedback or how to give good feedback? Because I don't think many people are particularly good at it.
I think so I'm kind of the opinion that one of the things that gets in the way of people giving good feedback is their emotional state that people kind of work themselves up into before they give the feedback, particularly if it's critical feedback.
Okay.
So I think one of the things that happens is, and I hear this pattern a lot in kind of coaching and in some of the work I do, is people say, "Oh, I've got to give this person some feedback on this." And I've been thinking about it now for, so by the time they're talking to me about it, they've maybe already been thinking about the feedback they've got to give for a week or so. By the time they actually have the conversation, they've rehearsed it, they've run through it, they've kind of, got themselves all concerned about what it might be like, and there's kind of an emotional tension. They wake up that day thinking, "Oh, I'm going to have that conversation today," and I think everything about that kind of, we're really good at picking up on kind of the emotional states in other people, and I think a lot of that brings a kind of tension and awkwardness to the conversation. And I think that's a natural human, kind of reaction and response to get yourself into that kind of state. So one of the biggest things I'm always saying is give the feedback as soon as you can. Say what you see without judgment, straightforwardly and in the moment.
Yes.
And actually, it's amazing how that lands so much better than... I always say, if you imagine you were on the other end, imagine if it was somebody that, if you were the person who, your line manager was thinking, "Oh, I need to give you feedback." Imagine how you would feel if you knew that for 2 weeks your manager had been going home at night and talking it through with their partner and wondering how to give you that feedback, and that it had taken them 2 weeks, and then they call you in and then they have the conversation. You'd be going, "No, please just say it to me. I'd much rather just know straight away at the time it happens."
Yes.
All of that kind of exacerbates it, but we have this sort of social awkwardness about having those more kind of authentic, open conversations straight away when stuff happens. I think catch it in the moment, be clear, be non-judgmental, say what you see without judgment, and move on. I think it's, and seek it back. I think that's the other thing as well. So
that's interesting, isn't it? Because that goes back to the piece you were talking about, vulnerability.
Yeah.
And I can hear in what you're saying that it's much easier to give high quality feedback if you're willing to be vulnerable as well. If you're putting on this veneer of perfection, then it becomes, it's impossible almost for it not to become critical. Yeah. Whereas if it's about, well, we're all vulnerable, here's something I noticed that maybe of use to you, is very different.
Yeah, and so different to that, and this is the other thing I see that some people do is that, in my 2 weeks of preparing to have this difficult conversation, I've made quite a lot of notes, and, so the person sits down and have the conversation, and there's the other person across the desk, and they've got their pen and their pad, and they're reading their notes, and they're looking at you as they're giving their feedback. There's not much in that interaction, which is about actually I'm connecting with you human to human.
Yes.
I'm sharing with you. Yeah. I'm sharing with you my experience of what I've just noticed in your behaviour. And I'm also then asking you, and I think this is another important part actually, is so that having given that feedback, particularly in a leader position, if we look at it from that angle, is how can I support you in being able to do this differently, or what do you need from me to be able to kind of develop that, change that, or
interesting that you said behaviour there as well, rather than who you are.
And this is the say what you see. Yes, not you're this. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to take you back to that contracting you were talking about inside an organisation and with inside a team, and that being an ongoing process. Do you think values, organisational values or team values, can be a part of that jigsaw, or what?
Yes, I mean, I think so. I think there are several things that are really important. I think one is a real sense of, and a lot of the research around engagement. And engagement in organisations and at a team level and individual kind of levels of engagement and aliveness around having a real sense of meaning and purpose in life, and that really is important in terms of our work. So the more we're kind of attached to a real sense of how we contribute, how we add value, how there's a kind of a real meaning and purpose that can be found in work that is supported through a set of values that really matter to us, you're really creating the conditions within which people are more likely to kind of really flourish and grow.
And how does that happen?
So I think it's a conversation. I think it's because one of the challenges is, and I think this is a thing some organisations have walked into, is that there can be a piece of work that's done at, say, senior level, establishing what the vision is and what the values are for the organisation. And then those get kind of pushed out or rolled out across the organisation. And where it sometimes falls down is there's no conversation about those that brings those to life. So actually, what do those look like at a behavioural level? How do those align with what my values are? How does my sense of meaning and purpose link into this? So how do we all see how collectively we are a part of kind of embodying the values in the organisation? But not in a way that's about saying we must all do this in the same way. So I think more conversation around what are my values and how do those sit alongside the values in the organisation and contribute to those. So a lot more discussion about that, I think, is important.
And we obviously all have our ideas as coaches and facilitators about how to do that. Any thoughts from you around if an organisation came to you and said, I love that, I heard that you talk about it on the podcast, I'd love you to do it.
Yeah.
What would you actually put in place, or how would you work on that? Obviously, we'd go in digitally and all of those sort of things, but...
Yeah. So it's about going in and facilitating conversations about what's important to people. So it may be, depending on the organisation, there may be different approaches and different methods of kind of doing that, but starting that conversation. And that's often involves starting that conversation at different levels across the organisation, not just kind of top team only, if you like.
Yes.
That actually this is something that needs to be facilitated through co-creation. And there are different methods and different approaches from doing that. So kind of technologies such as appreciative inquiry, for example, or kind of facilitative approaches that you can give you a really great framework for working with large groups of people in order to kind of create a really compelling vision and an approach moving forward. So,
lovely. You were talking about meaning and purpose at work, and so that people can flourish and grow. Anything else about the conditions for that? I know within positive psychology you talk about that quite a lot, but any thoughts about the conditions that need to be present for that to take place?
Several things. So, and I think one of the, and many of the viewers may be familiar with Dan Pink's work on drive, but the kind of underpinning theories that sit underneath that around self-determination theory and the idea of what might be kind of core drives or needs that we have as individuals and humans, and how are those fulfilled or met in our organisational context. So the need to have some kind of autonomy, to be able to kind of have some real sense of control over our lives and where we're going. The importance of relatedness, to kind of connect with other people. Connection really matters. We are a social species, and kind of connecting with others around us is really important. And mastery, that kind of real opportunity to be able to develop and grow, and to be able to kind of move forward and show progress, that these are kind of core elements of human experience. And when our organisational environments kind of put a kind of metaphorical glass, if you like, over us.
Yes.
And we can only go so far with some of those things. It limits our potential to flourish and grow in organisations. And I think it's a huge loss at an organisational level, because there's so much kind of untapped capability and potential that individuals could bring if that kind of glass was lifted and taken away.
And Mason and I were talking this morning about an article earlier this year in Forbes, which was entitled, and I looked down at my notes to try and remember this, but Why Your Millennials Are Leaving, and How to Stop Them.
Okay.
Any thoughts on because there seems to be something, the key things I think it was talking about were flexible hours, office atmosphere, these sort of things.
Yeah, and a lot of those things are about creating environments or cultures where individuals can and do flourish, and a lot more around flexibility, allowing people to be able to align their values with their organisational work, the opportunity to maybe engage in social projects and initiatives that are beyond those that are directly kind of addressed by the organisation. Being able to kind of shape one's role. So some of the work around job crafting by Amy Wisniewski, whose name I know I have completely incorrectly pronounced. But really interesting work looking at how can you, through identification of individuals' strengths, how can people kind of craft and shape and nudge the edges of their roles in order to be able to have, for example, increased autonomy, or it might be an opportunity to really develop their mastery or to connect more, to find the things that matter to them and be able to kind of grow and create more of that. And a lot of those things are really important. I have a bit of a kind of hobby horse about the whole millennials thing, because I think it's a term that's used a lot now, and it's another thing I hear in organisations is people say, well, the millennials want this, and that actually I think the stuff that often I see and hear being talked about around millennials is, to me, actually what humans want. It's just that the millennials are maybe kind of calling out for it.
Yes.
That actually, I think when you look at what a lot of those kind of conversations and discussions, if you went to somebody who was Generation X and said, how about a bit more of that at work? I think a lot of them would also be going, absolutely, I'm kind of all for that. So I don't think it's unique to millennials. I think it's that millennials have maybe kind of, the agenda has arisen on the back of that generation, if you like. But actually, I think these are human things.
Yeah, and I guess they're voting with their feet.
Yeah.
So organisations tend to move a little bit when there's pain involved.
Yeah.
And if you can't get
Yeah.
the right staff,
If you're not going to attract the talent
we've
you
got to
need,
do something
it
different.
matters. It really matters, yeah.
I'm hearing for that to work, though, that you're going to have to let go of the command and control
Completely.
structures.
Yeah.
How do you do that? If you've got command and control in as a primary paradigm within an
Yeah.
organisation, how do you get rid of enough of that? Because you have to trust that somebody will actually be working and will
Yeah.
do something,
Yeah.
and that you can craft a job
Yeah.
and not go, no, you just have to do this.
Yeah.
Any
Yeah.
thoughts on how that can actually be achieved?
So I'm kind of looping back a little bit to where we started at the beginning, because a lot of that is, so what is it? Where's the fear? What is it that people are fearful of happening
Yes.
if they let go of the control that the organisation currently feels it has because of the way in which it operates? And actually, how realistic is that or not? What are some of the beliefs or limitations that maybe sit underneath that that mean people feel very vulnerable about kind of saying? And I know this happens. I've had conversations with clients where I've talked about job crafting, for example, and there's a real kind of, oh, I don't know, that would be a really scary place to go. I don't know if we'd be able to do that. And so there is often an important piece of work around, okay, let's really look at that. Where is the fear? How realistic is that fear? And if there are limitations around it, how can you take elements of that, the spirit of, for example, job crafting, but not embrace it in its full form, for example, that eases you into some of those changes. So, you don't have to jump fully off and into it, and kind of let go of everything you've known that was kind of safe and made you feel in control before. So what are the kind of almost little bits that you can start to embrace that actually shift the ways of working a little bit? And then also looping back to the bit about actually what is it that's going on at a personal level around comfort and discomfort, around control and the need to be in control and what that means to let go. And often that's about a fear of uncertainty and not being able to predict outcomes.
Okay.
And if you're a senior leader, everything about the fact that you're in the position you are suggests that what you've been doing for years has been working. You've been promoted through the ranks. You've kind of been appointed because what you have done has worked. So there are years of evidence that would suggest that, I shouldn't stop doing what I've been doing for a long time. But there's a whole compelling kind of context within which we're operating in, which says that actually what worked before does not necessarily work now. And what worked in that role is often actually the very thing that holds us back when we move up into a more senior role.
Yes. Kevin Watson often says radical change has already happened.
Yeah.
This isn't about sitting with what change is it's happened.
Yes.
It's already out there.
Yeah.
It's about us catching up.
Yeah. I was interviewing a leader the other day for some research I was doing in one of the organisations I work in, and one of the things she said is, the job we need you to do this year is never going to be the same as the job that you were doing last year, and kind of everybody in an organisation needs to get their head around that. Yes,
and I'd probably extend that and probably this is what she meant, but from the stuff we were talking about with vulnerability, that's not just about the skill set, the things you're doing, but who you are being in that role probably will change from year to year.
Yeah. Which is exciting.
Hugely exciting.
Really exciting.
Yes. Can you just give us a 1 minute on job crafting?
So job crafting is about identifying what are your strengths and capabilities that you can bring to any role. Where's the value that you bring because of your strengths and capabilities? So that may well be that, actually there's something about the way you look at things, you look at problems and situations that enables you to make connections between things. Or it may be that you bring a kind of creative, original way of thinking to particular problems or ways of working. Or it may be that your strength is in really connecting with other people and understanding them and, showing real empathy and connection connection with others, with customers and clients. So looking at what is that value you really bring? What is the work that you do that really energizes and engages you? And then looking at what are the requirements within the role, and then looking at where are the overlaps and synergies of those. So there are always going to be elements of everybody's work that is the stuff that, we don't particularly like to do, but kind of has to be done. But it's about how can you kind of nudge and manage the role in such a way that you're spending less time on that, or you're able to perhaps bring and use your strengths in order to make that work more effectively for you.
Yeah.
And how can you grow the aspects of your role and kind of extend those so that you are playing to your strengths and playing to your energy levels. Doing more of the work that really engages you. And you can do that at an individual level, but also look at doing that collectively as a team. So if we look at all of us as a team, what are our collective strengths? What do we need to be achieving as a team? And how can we best work together in order to kind of manage all of those in a way that there's a kind of greater synergy between us all?
Thank you.
That's all right.
One of the things you mentioned when you're talking about meaning and purpose at work was social projects and initiatives and people getting involved in them. That sort of brings to mind organisations and how organisations are developing. How do you see organisations moving forward, and particularly in regards to social impact and
I think it matters a lot, actually, and I think it matters. I think it matters more and more to people that we want to be working for organisations that have a strong sense of kind of, a strong, clear moral compass. That there is a real social responsibility and a social conscience that you can see in the organisation. That there's a real commitment by the organisation to a sustainable way of working, to positively feeding back into the society that they operate in. And I think also as consumers, as customers of organisations, these things increasingly matter to us as well. So being able to have the opportunity to be able to do that and contribute to that in an organisation, I think is a really compelling and important part of finding more meaning and purpose for individuals.
And, that sort of, to me, traditionally, coming from having founded a charity and that sort of thing, and worked a lot with corporations and with corporate social responsibility and stuff like that, there certainly used to be a time when I used to bang a drum and jump up and down frustrated. It's like, why are you, organisation, doing this bit of random community support work? Very nice, but not at all connected to your brand and who you are and what a difference you are. And it's almost like this isolated giving money to things.
Yes.
I'm noticing a change in what you're saying there, this move to your customers, your staff, are going to be voting with their feet based on these things. Any thoughts about how that's going to change organizations, or how that change can actually take place, because we're champions for it?
Yes. So I think, it's interesting what you were saying about the, kind of almost like it's a thing that's done within a set of boundaries, as if, like, I don't know, this is the social project or the initiative that we're contributing to, and it's kind of almost like it's wrapped up and pocketed away as a sort of, almost a little side part, as opposed to looking at corporate social responsibility every which way you slice the organisation.
Yes.
And I think that's an important shift in terms of the way of thinking about it. How is everything that we are doing impacting, and how do we want to kind of dial that up in order to have more positive impact, and involving individuals in doing that. So through things like partnerships with local schools, for example, looking at connections with individual things that matter to people within the organisation, and kind of, I think a lot of those sorts of things there could be more and more of.
Yes. Okay. And I'm hearing in this conversation a lot of change, a lot of things, different ways of needing to do things. And, I think the one constant that we're all facing at the moment is the way it was last year isn't the way that it is this year, as you just said. How can people best prepare themselves for this changing world, or become more resilient to it?
So I think there are a few things. There are the things you can do kind of day to day. So there are what I would call kind of positive habits or practices that help build personal resilience, are kind of, you know, how resilient we might be on a day-to-day basis. But not only our resilience, but also, you know, actually the kind of dialing up the way in which we feel we're engaged and connected with the world around us, with others around us, and that we're really kind of active agents in our own life and kind of shaping our own destiny and kind of moving forward, through to, I think, kind of bigger areas to be looking at, such as the way in which the kind of choices we make about the work that we do, how we organise and create our environments around us, where we choose to live, the way in which we shape our lives at a broader and larger level. At a kind of daily habits type of level, things like gratitude practices, for example, have consistently been shown. I mean, the evidence base behind bringing in some kind of gratitude practice into your life are really remarkable, actually. Some very kind of compelling evidence there. Taking time out to just be a little bit more. So whether or not that's through kind of mindfulness type of practices, or more particular meditation type practices, or whether it's that, just going for a walk in the woods on a glorious autumn day like it is today, and just looking up and soaking in the kind of amazing colours. So creating those moments in our lives on a day-to-day basis can make an enormous difference and kind of ground us and kind of connect us with a different perspective on our lives, which kind of fuels us and recharges us, as well as, I say, those kind of larger things, and thinking about actually what's really important to me in my life. What are my values? Where is it I want to be? What's my sense of meaning and purpose? And how do I make choices about my career, about what I'm doing, my relationships, about where and how I live, that are grounded in some of those? Knowing they're not fixed, of course, because it's a journey. It's a journey. It's never sorted.
Yeah,
sure.
And it links back to that vulnerability piece as well, doesn't it? It's being okay with it not being sorted.
And actually, that's and imagine what it would be like if it was. Imagine if you got there and there was, I don't know, you woke up on a Monday, and you went, wow, that's it, it's all sorted. Then what would we do? That's the
waiting
fun.
for that day.
The fun is in the journey.
Okay, and I think I'm hearing hope in that as well. I'm hearing excitement, this excitement for the future. We're talking about change here. We're talking about how much is changing and how fast things are changing. Have you got any thoughts, putting on your futurologist hat? Any thoughts about organisations or sectors or careers or anything like that you think is going to be obsolete in a few years' time, or that significant changes are going to take
really
place?
Really curious about what it is that's going to unfold. It's kind of, you almost think, if you can imagine it, it's a possibility, isn't it? Is that how the kind of landscape of our kind of world might be in 50 odd years from now. I sense that there's going to be increasingly dispersed models of leadership. I think increasingly organisations that are much more kind of fluid and adaptable. I think there's going to be a significant increase in flexibility in the ways in which people work across things like, for example, not only working for one organisation, and a lot more around collaboration, organisational collaboration and partnership, the whole AI piece is really interesting. How that's going to kind of shape and influence the way in which organisations operate. I think I'm really kind of optimistic and hopeful that on the back of some of the concerns that organisations raise with me in the conversations I have with them now about wanting to create really positive workplaces for people, that when they're looking at introducing and investing in more and more AI technology, that it's done with that in mind. And it's that how can we use what AI brings us in order to actually create the space and freedom for the people that work in the organisation to be able to, for example, craft their jobs more, to really bring the most out of the kind of human strengths that they bring. Because actually it could be really exciting. We could have, it's the opportunity to create really exciting organisations. So I think that's a really kind of big shift. So I'm very curious to see quite how that plays out in another 50 years. But I think starting to ask those questions and embracing some of the ways in which technology can allow us to be more human in our workplaces is an important one.
In a moment, I'm going to ask you the big question, the how does change happen question.
Oh, okay.
So just to prepare you, warn you on that. I just want to come back briefly to that collaboration and partnerships piece that you were talking about there, because I think that is interesting. How, we in Bristol, been doing a little bit of work, or Andy's been doing a little bit of work with the new nuclear build project happening down in Hinckley. And really, collaboration is definitely a buzzword there, but there seems to be real challenges for a lot of these big projects about getting people to collaborate, and there's so many cost savings and opportunities from doing so. What are your thoughts on collaboration and partnership?
So I think there are enormous bonuses and reasons, strong, compelling reasons to be doing more collaboration and more partnership working. I think we operate in a changing world in terms of access to information, and I think the more sharing there is of kind of insights and learning, actually there's more opportunity for us to grow together in order to kind of expand that and make the most of it, and kind of grow and benefit kind of society and our organisations, as opposed to that more kind of scarcity model of this is mine, keep it, protect it, and the value is in putting boundaries around it. I think increasingly we're seeing that actually the value comes in sharing, and that leads to more new stuff, which actually just means we all grow. Equally, collaboration is not always, it's not that, you go into organisations and it's not about saying actually everything you're doing you ought to be collaborating on. Yes. Collaboration can take more time. There can be all sorts of challenges that come with collaboration. It can be that, and slipping into a way of working, which is that it's more around compromise and trying to find some kind of collective way forward, which actually means you're not getting the kind of, the best output, or the bit that if there was a smaller, more specialist team that had real kind of depth of knowledge and insight or ideas, and that might come up with. So sometimes do we end up with something that's kind of, mediocre because it's the adapted kind of watered down version that everyone can agree on. Yes. As opposed to actually the more kind of cutting edge, really challenging, perhaps higher risk solution that might have come up if it had been a smaller group working, for example. Or so thinking about how and when to collaborate. But I think I've yet to go into an organisation and they're over collaborating. I'm not too concerned that the pendulum is going to swing so far the other way that everyone's collaborating about everything. I think that's unlikely, but it's always a risk though, that bit of at an individual level or an organisational level, that they kind of want to drive more, or we need more collaboration, or we need more we need more creativity, or we need whatever it might be, and they kind of set their goal for wanting to have more of that, and then what ends up happening is they completely overcompensate, and it's rather than at the moment we think we're 5 out of 10 on collaboration if we were to give an arbitrary kind of figure to it, and we maybe would like to dial it up a little bit more. Let's see what 6 or 7 might be like. And where would it make the biggest difference? Yes, and as opposed to kind of this pendulum swing that you see happen in all kind of walks of life, really, that overcompensation as you suddenly redirect your energies to another area.
Yeah, it's interesting. It also talks back, I suppose, to what you were talking about around vulnerability as well, that need for vulnerability in order to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And also the values or that contracting piece and matching values between the organizations or teams that
really
need
important
to collaborate.
for collaboration. And you really need to be able to for collaboration to work effectively, you really need to be able to embrace that vulnerability that is required to have a kind of more honest, open, deeper type of conversation about things and really be able to move things forward. So,
okay. Yeah, and I'm hearing, increasingly I'm seeing that there's a role, one of the things I say is that training is probably dead, or getting that way.
Yeah.
Old school flatline training. I think that's not a bad thing.
No.
One of the growth areas potentially where having a really strong facilitator or a coach in areas of collaboration, there are advantages to having that external force. I think potentially collaboration might be one of those where that ability to step back and support that alignment of values and question.
Definitely. What I was saying earlier about process versus content.
Yeah.
And one of the things that facilitating that work, it means the facilitator can track process and can manage and hold process in such a way that it really enables the group and the team or the partners involved in the collaboration to kind of dip in and engage in the content. So it's
Thank you. Okay, so here's the question. How does change happen?
No small one.
No, right up there, right at the top.
Well, it's interesting because in one sense, it always is all the time already. I mean, we are changing. We're never the same. I mean, literally, almost in every minute to minute, we are changing in difference. Change is the natural order of things. We sat here like I was saying earlier, on a kind of autumn day, looking out, kind of autumn colours. It's, change is happening out of the window, and it's happening to each and every one of us all the time. So in a sense, change is natural. And then there's the other bit of change, which is the change we kind of want to force, or, that we want to kind of direct. And the challenge, I think, sometimes is finding how do we hold those two things together. So how do we lean into the kind of natural process of change, and at the same time have a sense of where it is we want to be going, what's the vision, what's the kind of the broader area that we want to be moving towards, and managing that natural process of change, but towards a certain type of direction. And I think one of the challenges is that we often try and force change in a way that is counter to the kind of natural unfolding of change that is happening in each one of us as individuals and is happening as part of society and at an organisational level as well.
Wonderful.
But I don't know if that answers the question, really, does it? But,
I think it one of the things we're enjoying, and one of the reasons we often ask that question, is just to get the different takes on it, the different views, the different, as we try and build this map around how does change happen. And we're both considered by a lot of people out there experts in the topic of change, and yet I suppose we have the vulnerability and humility to recognise there are so many different takes on it, and if we can only map some of that across different domains as well, then we've got new insights and opportunities that can abound from it. So I think perfect answer. Thank you very much. Okay, Sarah, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for imparting your wisdom. Thank you for being
a fun conversation. I enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Thank you for being part of the 91 Untold Change Project. Really looking forward to the next steps of the adventure together, and appreciate all of your words today.
Brilliant. Thank you. As I say, I've really enjoyed it. Permission to kind of waffle on about things. I just hope I haven't bored everybody listening to TSL on the other end.
Well, the nice thing is, if we did, they tuned off ages ago.
That's true. By now, they've missed my apology.
Exactly.
No, I should have apologised.
Put it in at the beginning.
Yes. A little opening. Brilliant.
Fantastic.
Thanks,
Sarah,
Neil.
thank you.
All right.
Thank you for listening to this 91 Untold Change Project podcast. I'm Neil Almond. If you've enjoyed it, please subscribe. You can also keep in touch with our adventures on social or at 91untold.com. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to the adventures ahead.